Welcome to KR Films Entertainment Channel. Today I'm going to be explaining a 2022 adventure drama film 777 Charlie. The movie starts off as we are taken around the house of an evil dog breeder. There are dogs in tiny cages and illegal substances all over the table. One puppy manages to open its cage and break out through the window. The little puppy is then seen running across the woods and into the city. As months passed by, he grows up and learns to live by stealing food from the people around him. His favorite thing to do is rolling around in ice. She seems to be a very mischievous little pooch who brings about destruction everywhere she goes. In the next scene, we watch Dharma, who is an alcoholic. His life revolves around sleep, work, alcohol, and cigarettes. He lives in a very untidy house with bottles and cigarettes in every nook and corner. Every time he falls asleep, he has terrible nightmares about his family. When he was just a boy, his parents and sister left him home alone to go get ice cream. On the way back home, a dog came in between the car and swerved off the road and died in the accident. Ever since then, Dharma has been an orphan with no one to love him or tell him otherwise. That is why he is the way he is. At work, he's been the employee of the year for the past 3 years. He never misses a day of work as he has nothing else to do. The bosses appreciate him for all his hard work, but all the other employees hate him as they don't get their promotion because the bosses use Dharma as an example. He's a very rude man to his neighbors and nobody interferes in his business. One night, while everyone is having fun partying nearby, Dharma gets annoyed because of all the noise. He goes to the party and bashes the living crap out of everyone and disrupts the party. We see that the puppy has also stumbled upon the same neighborhood and she seems to be terrified of all the fireworks. So she takes a liking to Dharma as he stopped all the ruckus. She follows him home that night and waits outside his gate. The next morning, we watch all the neighbors are terrified of him, especially a tiny little girl. The parents scare their kids that the bad man will take them away if they don't behave. The puppy seems to follow him everywhere he goes. She tries to get in his house, but he shoos it away every time. He's never had a pet in his life, so he doesn't expect to start with one now. The dog tries to take shelter in the rain, but he kicks her out and she seemed getting drenched every morning. The puppy eats whatever food Dharma throws in the trash. That's how she feels her little tummy. One day, while Dharma walks home, the puppy is seen following him and runs across the road and meets with a terrible accident. Dharma, shocked by the sight, and tries to shake it off by ignoring it. The neighbors just seem to care about the injured biker and nobody tends to the dog as dogs are not allowed in the colony. Dharma goes home and lights a cigarette, but he isn't able to shake off the injury of the poor dog, so he decides to help. He finds an empty suitcase, attaches it to his bike, and takes the dog to the vet. The little girl, who is terrified of him, is happy that he's taking care of the puppy. At the vet, the doctor tells him that the dog is a Labrador. Dharma says that the dog is in his and he's just going to pay for the treatment and leave. The vet isn't too happy about this as they already have enough dogs there to take care of, so he convinces Dharma to take the dog home and feed her the meds for only 4 days until he finds someone to adopt the puppy. Back at home, he sneaks the puppy into his house, but the little girl spots a tail and is seen adorably smiling at him. He tells her to shush and she agrees. The first night at the house, the puppy takes the couch while Dharma sleeps on his bed. The dog is very restless and barks all night long, and Dharma seen walking to and fro trying to get the dog to keep quiet. For the first time in his life, Dharma seen slacking behind at his job because he was up all night. The dog seems to have pooped in the house, so Dharma decides to take her for a walk at the park. She seems very mischievous, so he decides to just let her free and run home. Back at home, he hears a knock on the door. The little girl spotted the puppy at the park and brought it back with her in her school backpack. So now Dharma's stuck taking care of the little rascal again. For the next 2 weeks, she raises complete havoc on his bachelor lifestyle. She wakes up in the middle of the night, bites his nuts, and even runs out to the road with his boxers. Dharma gets irritated by all this and calls up the vet again and asks him to arrange someone to adopt the dog soon. The vet tells him to feed the dog nice food and get him to the park so he can click good pictures of the dog. A few days later, the vet calls Dharma up with a family who is willing to adopt the puppy. He tells him that they'll be home at noon to see the puppy, and Dharma leaves off work early. When he gets home, to his surprise, he sees that the mischievous run has destroyed his couch, leaving his house in a complete mess. He chases the puppy around the house, and just then the adoption people arrive. Looking at the mess, they realize that this dog isn't going to be easy to raise, so they run away from the place. Dharma tries to convince them otherwise, but to no avail. All the neighbors seem to have gained up on him as dogs are not allowed in the colony. Dharma yells at them and they all get scared and walk away. He then calls up the vet again and asks him to find another family to adopt a dog. The vet tells him that he'll put up an ad on Facebook, but he needs to get the dog licensed first. The next day he headed to the licensing camp along with the puppy. He meets a pretty lady named Tuvika who runs an animal welfare program. She helps him get the dog licensed but is suspicious about Dharma because he does not seem very responsible, so she hides a tracker on the dog. A few days later, Tuvika along with her team come for a checkup to his house. They advise him to stop smoking around the dog and get her more food as it's almost empty. That evening, while the dog is out in the yard, Dharma yells at her and goes out to get her. Just then he collapses. She runs to him and tries to wake him up. He is then taken to the hospital in an ambulance and the dog is seen running behind it to make sure her guardian is all right. She dodges all the security guards and runs into the hospital and manages to find his room. She keeps barking while everyone is shocked looking at the mud in the hospital. The doctor tells Dharma that the reason for his health condition is due to excessive smoking. The next morning the dog wakes up Dharma as usual and he sees her jumping in front of the TV looking at ice cream. So that evening he decides to get her some because of her kind gesture the previous evening. He pets her for the first time ever, but just then the doorbell rings. The vet has come to take the dog with another family. Dharma seems to be dumbstruck as he's gotten attached to the dog, but he isn't able to tell them about it since he has conflicted feelings about getting rid of it. The dog tries to avoid the family, but the kids tie him up and take him away. Dharma seems heartbroken that the dog is finally out of his life. He then goes into a depressive phase where he isn't able to concentrate on work, eat food, and dreams about the dog at night. A few days later, the vet calls up Dharma and asks him to give the license to the new family, so he decides to pay his little pile of visit. When he visits the family, all the kids are huddled in the corner and it looks like the dog has made a complete mess of the house. Everyone is super mad at her, and as soon as she sees Dharma, she runs and jumps on him. He laughs and takes the dog back home on his bike, officially adopting the mud. After this, it looks like he's a changed man. At work, he's kinda the little girl and embrace the dog, and he finally decides to name the dog Charlie. They have many little adventures together, and Dharma decides to use an old bathtub to build a sidecar for his motorcycle so that Charlie and him can roam around peacefully. Charlie is very excited with his new ride, and the little girl and him go for a stroll. They even buy matching t-shirts and click adorable pictures together. One day when he comes back home from work, he notices that Charlie isn't her excited self anymore. She's just lying around not moving. When Dharma goes to check up on her, it looks like she's beautiful. Over a worry, Dharma rushes her to the vet. The doctor tells him that she is suffering from cancer which is caused by inbreeding. He tells him that he doesn't have much time with her and that he needs to make the most of it before she's gone forever. When he takes her home, he looks at Charlie jumping at the TV again. He realizes that the reason she gets excited is because of the snow, as the cold temperature eases her pain. So he plans a trip across the country so Charlie can experience the snow before she passes away. He quit his job and makes a few adjustments to his bike, and they set out on their long journey. The little girl hugs Dharma and tells her goodbyes, and she cries as they leave. On their ride there, they stop at many places and have fun together. They then stop at the beach and Dharma gets a call from the vet. He sends Dharma a video of a puppy being tortured by an evil breeder, and the puppy resembles Charlie. He decides to pay the evil man a visit. When he reaches there, he beats the shit out of this giant man, and Charlie and Dharma both end up burying him until the cops get there. In the next scene, we watch as the Vigo inquires about Dharma with his neighbors. A neighbor who hates him tells him that he's an evil man who never cared for the doe. Just then she gets a call about the evil breeder and goes to the site. There she checks the tracker she put on Charlie and realizes that Dharma was at the same spot with his dog. Suspecting him for being involved in immoral behavior, she decides to follow them and have a check-up on Charlie. The first night on the open road, they try to crash at a hotel, but no hotel in the area allows dogs to sleep there as it would disturb the other guests. When he sits on the road, he notices a poster of a blind man. He gets an idea and decides to act blind so that Charlie can be his service dog. Once he did this, the next hotel let him in. The next morning, the both of them go for a swim in the nearby lake. On the way to the next location, they drop many people who needed a ride. He then ties Charlie outside a grocery store and goes in to get some food. Unfortunately, Charlie spots a mouse and goes chasing after it. Dharma runs after Charlie, but Charlie ends up dropping a pot on the windshield of a police car. They both get arrested and are thrown in jail. The police ask him to pay a hefty fine, but Dharma says he's too broke to do so. The Vigo arrived just in time and deceived Charlie. She says that it's her dog. So the police make her pay and they are all sent packing. The Vigo, who still thinks that Dharma is a bad person, sits in his sidecar and doesn't let go of Charlie until her team arrives. Dharma continues on his journey and DeVito seems tagging along. She questions Dharma as to why he treats such a sweet dog so badly. He gets mad at her and asks her who gave her this information. Just then she gets a call from her team who watch the surveillance footage and they figure out that Dharma is a good guy who beat up the evil breeder. To Vika realizes she was wrong and apologizes and asks to be dropped at the nearest airport. That night they camp in the desert and Charlie ignores her and goes to sleep with her guardian. This is when she realizes what a loving man he really is. The next morning as they continue on their journey, they spot people paragliding. He asks to Vika to accompany Charlie on the ride, but she makes him go. Dharma seems to be terrified at first, but after a few minutes he has the time of his life with his best buddy. They then continue on their journey and while refueling, Dharma notices that Charlie is EG, so he removes his vest and notices that he's having terrible hair, for his heart shatters and he hugs Charlie. This is when Window Vika figures out that Charlie has cancer. They all share an emotional ride to the next hotel. The next day as they are taking a break in the next village, to Vika introduces her friend from college who's a publisher. He found Dom's story to be very inspiring and decided to write an article about him in his magazine. The Vigo Dharma then part ways as she decides to go back home with her friend. Dharma and Charlie then continue on their long journey. On the way his bike breaks down. They sit on the side of the road asking for a lift. One man stops and helps them up. He also has a Labrador with him and he seems to be an animal lover. He lets Dharma crash it as in for the night and helps fix his bike. They have a good time together riding horses and sharing stories. The next day Dharma packs up and when he's about to leave, the man gives him a ticket for a dog show as he wasn't going to make it. At the dog show it looks like he has a ticket to be a contestant. He freaks out but he isn't able to do anything about it. To Vika's one of the judges and she wishes him the best of luck. All the dogs seem to be well-trained top performers. The dogs go through the obstacles with ease, which leaves Dharma dumbstruck. Finally it's Charlie's turn. The second she is led off her leash, she has seen running around and barking. This enrages the judges and they humiliate Dharma in front of the crowd. Dharma then gets mad and yells at Charlie. Everyone in the audience goes silent. He then puts up an adorable show where he acts mad and Charlie comes over to cheer him up. Everyone loves this. For their final act he lifts up a pole and calls to Charlie. Charlie makes the jump and hugs Dharma and the crowd goes wild. The two inseparable buddies then continue on their journey. As he runs out of money he decides to camp for the night, but the terrible storm takes away his tent. He then takes refuge in an abandoned bus. The next day he spends all his remaining money on meds for Charlie. Without any hope he decides to sell his bike and use the money to get Charlie to the snow. They hiked for a bit until they get on a bus with some hippies. On the bus ride he notices that Charlie isn't feeling too good, so he takes Charlie to a local healer. The healer tries her best by covering up the rashes and tells Dharma that Charlie is pregnant, but she isn't sure if the puppies are going to make it. Dharma breaks down crying that night, praying for Charlie to get back to health so they can make it to the mountains. To his surprise, Charlie gets back to normal and they continue on their journey. On the bus ride to the mountains, the duo finally spots snow, but the road is blocked due to a landslide. Dharma ends up fighting with the military to let him pass through as he doesn't know how much time Charlie has left. A higher authority overhears their fight and takes him to his office. He tells Dharma that he's appeared in various magazines and is famous. So he'd take him to see the snow the next day. Until then he could crash with them. That night he notices that Charlie isn't keeping too well, so he decides to put Charlie in a bag and hike through the woods to get to the snow. Dharma walk for miles and miles through the hard terrain and he finally gets to the snow. Charlie and him have the best time playing and rolling around in the snow. Dharma finally feels at peace as he completes his mission at the mountain. He loses Charlie for some time and panics while looking for him. He spots paw prints and tracks Charlie down to an abandoned cabin. At the cabin they both share an emotional moment and Charlie passes away in his arms. Dharma breaks down crying and yelling over the loss of his dog. He suddenly hears something inside the cabin and when he goes to check on it he finds a little puppy. Charlie gave his best friend another dog go to take care of him when she's gone. A few months later we watch his Dharma goes back home along with his new puppy and he started an animal welfare center with the Vigo in memory of Charlie. This movie hits hard because I wanted my dog to experience the beach as well. The day I finally took her to the beach we had the best time and she passed away that evening when she was hit by a truck. Thank you for watching.